I've mentioned the term counterpoint, and I want to look a little bit more closely at it. Now, it's about two or more independent voices that interact with each other, and they're dependent harmonically when they fall in the same beats. They have to conform to whatever underlying harmony is there, but the lines work independently. And there are certain techniques and rules, although I like to think of them more as suggestions in a modern context, to follow to help with the task of constructing these contrapuntal lines. Now, counterpoint is a deep theoretical study, and it can involve 2, 3, 4 voices. And there's all kinds of rules for the motion of the inner voices and outer voices. And it's beyond the scope of this series to cover all that. I want to give you an introduction to some of the main principles as a device to help you when you're orchestrating, so you have some techniques to use when you're orchestrating in different situations. Now, here's a little melodic theme. I'm in the key of B flat. So very simple phrase. It's what we call conjunctive movement. It's stepwise or scale-wise. It's not comprised of any leaps or skips or jumps when it jumps in bigger intervals. So let's say as an orchestrator, you're faced with the task of orchestrating this phrase. Here it is again. All right, so you want to continue it in a second voice. One thing you could do is just repeat it an octave lower. Or you can repeat it and maybe change part of the ending of it. Or just to change a little bit of it. Or you can repeat it at a different interval. So again, here's the first one. Maybe repeat it starting on the 5th. Or combine that with changing the end. Something like that. So here's the next version where I've continued it and started the second voice on the 5th and changed the end of the phrase. This is what we call free counterpoint versus strict counterpoint. So here I've started it on a different beat in the bar as well, so there's a bit of rhythmic displacement for variety. So here we have to start thinking about harmony. So if I have the first phrase starting on the 1 chord, so it'd be B flat major in the key of B flat. And then here I'm going to suggest or imply that we're moving to the 5 chord as I continue this along. So once more, I'm repeating the theme starting on the 5th degree of the tonic chord instead of starting it on the root here. And I change the end of the phrase slightly and ending on the 5 chord. Now, of course, with only 2 notes, we're not really outlining strong harmonies, but this is what I'm suggesting. And if we were going to flesh it out with 3 or 4 voices, we could spell it out based on the underlying harmony. Now, here's the next example that I've got. And here I'm continuing where I'm going to have a leap in the second voice to draw the listener's attention. So here we're on the 5 chord, which is F. And in the second voice, I'm jumping here from this A all the way up to the F over there, and then back down over here by an octave. So that's really sort of commanding a lot of attention while this is moving a nice, polite, scale-wise motion. And you'll notice that when I have the 2 notes happening at the same time, they're always very consonant intervals, either thirds or sixth, ideally. If you have a 4th or a 5th or an octave, you want to make sure the next note is not another 4th or another 5th or another octave. That's what we call parallel 4ths and parallel 5ths, and you want to avoid those. So let's listen to this one last time. And here I'm suggesting the 4 chord, which would be an E flat chord, and I have the 5th and the 3rd there. And let's continue this little exercise. And you'll notice how I'm moving the activity between the voices, where one takes the lead and the other takes more of a supporting role. So here I'm going to continue in the top voice. You don't have to go top, bottom, top, bottom. Here I'm going to do 2 sort of top lines in a row, and that's fine. But the idea is to vary it. And here I'm going to suggest moving back to the 5 chord, and I'm implying the 5/7 with this E flat here. So if I'm on an F chord for these last 2 beats, this E flat suggests an F7 leading back to the 1. So here I'm introducing another little motif. We started with this upward scale-like motion, and here I'm doing a little bit of a jump up here and then going down and up. It's another little melodic contour, which is a variation of the theme. And now here I'm ending on the one chord, and here we're going from the E flat to F down to the D. And let's look at the next iteration of this where I've added in the second voice underneath here. So here I've introduced a new little eighth note motif with a little bit of a skip in it to fill in the hole during this. So it's a nice little counter melody motif. And we have here the resolution where we're on the A on the F and it goes up to the B flat, which is the resolution you want for this type of movement. And here we have the E flat, the seventh going down to the D. So the seventh resolves to the third. And here the third is resolving to the root. Now let's continue this. So here I've introduced a new motif and I'm adding a bit of ornamentation with a little bit of extra notes added in, changing up the rhythm to make the counter line more interesting in the bass voice here. And one last variation I want to continue it with, just to show you how you keep going with this. And the mistake a lot of people make is they'll write one whole line and then try and write a second counter line. But it's best to work in little chunks, like the way I'm doing it here, one phrase at a time, fleshing out the second part, the next phrase, and so on. And that way you can keep your harmony in order as you're working. So here I've ended off on the 5 chord, but this could be the 1 chord of a modulation. So this is an F chord where I have the F and the A. So if that was an F, this could imply a little bit of a secondary dominant here with the B flat. This could be a C7 leading up to the new tonic chord in a new key if I was modulating. And again, depending how I flesh this out with more voices and how I want to continue it, that could be thought of as a new tonal center here versus just the dominant, again, depending how we're continuing. So let me take this little example of this exercise, and I've split it out, the top line on violin and the second line on viola. So this is the exact part that we've just constructed, played out with the 2 strings. So that works very nicely. And of course, that can be doubled on brass or woodwinds and so on and develop. Now, a couple of little principles, again, I want to sort of introduce to you when you're working like this. We have different types of motion. There's my main theme, and this type of accompaniment is called oblique motion for the second voice, when one line stays constant while the other lines move. Another form of counterpoint is similar motion, where both lines move in the same direction. So they're both moving, and the next kind of variation is contrary motion, where both lines move in opposite directions. So different ideas and strategies to get your creative juices going when you're coming up with ideas on how to orchestrate motifs. So let's look at a couple of general principles here to remember. Conjunct movement, meaning scale-wise or step-wise movement, are the norm, and you can use tied common tones. So if you're, for example, holding an F and you're moving your harmony from F to B flat, you can tie the F over, so it's a common tone between the 2 harmonies. Now, leaps, by contrast, are special events and should be thought of like that to renew interest, to open up new registers in the part, to jump to different ranges, and to attract the listener's attention. And it's a kind of accent. So to get you started with counterpoint or writing counter melodies, you can try imitating parts an octave lower, imitating them starting on a different pitch, like the 5th in my examples that I did, or imitating it and modifying the end. And this is what we call free counterpoint versus strict counterpoint, where it's strict imitation. Now, here are a couple of rules of counterpoint, although I prefer to present them as suggestions. The intervals between your main voice and counter voice should be consonant. So think major, minor, third, or sixth, or perfect unisons, fourths or fifths, or octaves. Don't double the third of a chord. These are just general principles. Avoid parallel fifths, parallel fourths, and parallel octaves. So if you have that interval between your two voices, make sure the next notes aren't the same interval. The seventh of the dominant seventh chord resolves down to the third of the tonic chord, like you saw in my example. And similarly, the third of the dominant seventh chord will resolve to the root of the tonic chord. Now use notes in the key signature. These are good to get you started for nice, consonant, smooth sounding counterpoint. Exceptions are when you have the leading tone in a minor scale. So if you're in, let's say, C minor, the seventh degree would be maybe a B natural instead of B flat. And if you're setting up a modulation, you might need some accidentals to set you up for the new key signature. Now, this one is related to what we were talking about here. If your second to last note is the leading tone, it should resolve up a half step to the tonic at the cadence. So like in the example I just showed you in the piano parts on that F chord, let's say I have an A in the melody, which is the leading tone in the key of B flat, and I'm on that F7 chord and I have the A. You want that A to resolve up to the B flat tonic at the cadence. Now, your counter melody should not contain multiple successive large leaps like fifths or sixths in the same direction. And this is just a matter of maintaining interest. And avoid simultaneous leaps in the same direction. So try and vary them. If you're jumping up, jump down the next time. And here are some traditional suggestions for determining which notes in a chord to double when you have, let's say you're a triad with 3 notes and you have maybe 4 instruments or 5 instruments or 6 instruments. Which notes do you double? Well, when the root is in the bass, double the root. When the fifth is in the bass, double the fifth. When the third is in the bass, double either the top voice, unless that top voice is the third also, then double the root. Again, these are traditional suggestions. And as the saying goes, rules are meant to be broken. See you for more in the next video. In this video, I want to look at the ostinato and layering sounds on different planes of tone in different registers with different timbres. Now, an ostinato is a short motif or phrase that repeats over and over again, and it can be approached different ways. Often it's just 1 or 2 different pitches, although it can be a little bit more of a complex line. And in my example, there's a little bit more than just a couple of pitches. But the idea is that it repeats. It might be a rhythmic pattern or part of the tune or a complex melody, but the idea is that it repeats over and over again. And depending on the harmony underneath, it could create tension if the harmonies change and the pitches of the ostinato doesn't. And that's one device. Or the ostinato can not be executed in an exact repetition, but it can be developed along with the harmonies by changing some of the notes to fit the chords and evolving harmonies as it progresses. But the idea is the ostinato is a repeating motif or phrase. So let's take a look and listen at this little arrangement that I have, and then we'll look at what's going on. So there's our familiar motif that we've been working with throughout this series. So the idea here is it's a fairly consonant motif and there's not really any dramatic modulations happening. So I can just use this ostinato throughout. Now I could, to create some tension, modulate the repetition of the melody at some point, and that way there'll be some contrast with the ostinato, or modulate the ostinato and leave this at the original key and tonalities. Those are different devices for orchestration to create tension. But for now, let's just look at the basic ostinato. So this is what I have going on. And that's it. It's those 4 bars over and over again. And it's in A minor, so there's nothing really too distant in here. There's a little passing tone, but That's all there is out of the key. And this is just a key switch note. So that's what I have happening. And I'm doubling it on the cellos where I have some double stops happening, and with the bass. And then the French horns are playing the same thing as the cellos. So again, I'm repeating this motif on different planes of tones with different timbres. And I have some orchestral percussion happening. But the idea is that the tuba and bass are playing the low notes, and the French horns and cellos are doubling the harmonization of it. It repeats again. And even the percussion, I have a simple 4-bar phrase. Some timpani and bass drum. So nice little interesting complex rhythm, but it all works together nicely. And then with the melody, I have this coming in with flutes, bassoons, and trombones. So again, very disparate timbres. So layering different timbres in different ranges works really nicely. In this case here, the flutes, the bassoons, and the trombones. And then for the repetition of the melody, I'm doubling it again, or layering it, with muted trumpets, which have a lot of personality, clarinets, 2 violins, and glockenspiel. So let's listen to that. So up high. And here I have them harmonized. Bring in the clarinets and the trumpets with the mutes and the glock to cut through. So layering on different planes of tones with different timbres underneath an ostinato. That's what I want to show you in this video. Play it one more time. See you for more in the next video. A good part of our job as orchestrators is developing thematic material. And there are several tools in our toolbox that we have to do this. And one of the ways that I want to start by looking at right now is reharmonizing. So this is the melody that we've been working with throughout this series. And I think it's a good vehicle to explore the different techniques on. So that's the main theme we've been using, and I've been harmonizing it in A minor. But we can harmonize it in the relative major. It'll work in C. And why not use some voice leading and bass notes for some interesting bass movement? To F with A in the bass. F major 7. And then I'm going to go to B half diminished for a change, which is a nice new chord. E7, flat 9, that F up there. And of course, there's lots of different ways we can reharmonize it, but this is one idea, and it's a way of orchestrating a theme. And what about tempo? We've been working at about 108, 109 to 118, somewhere around there. But we can play it at different tempos. Here in this example, I'm going to be using 156 beats per minute. the bass. So there I've orchestrated it, reharmonizing the chords and using a different tempo. Let's just listen to these two alone. And I've also elongated the melody. And we're going to look at different techniques for changing the main themes around as well. So let's look at how I've orchestrated this. I've got the bass doubled with trombones and as well the bass strings. And they're longer on the trombones intentionally. Let's add in the French horns here. And you can see it's doubling violin too. And let me just solo both of these. I have the strings pretty quiet, but it's a nice double with the horns. And I have a little counter section going on here with the clarinets and the violas. And then the melody on these three instruments. Trumpets without the mutes, English horn and flutes. And I have some percussion. I have tambourine and woodblock for a little bit of a different rhythm with bass drum. Some snare in there. So there, I've reharmonized and used a different tempo. Now let's look at the next example. Modulation. Now there's different ways of using modulation. And in this case, let me play this example where I've starting out the same as what I've just done and then modulating the whole thing to a different key. So we're ending off in A minor, starting in C. Modulation. Up to the fourth, key of F. And now we can lead back to C if we want to go back to the top. And we could loop the whole thing if we wanted to. But the idea here is that we're modulating the whole theme up a fourth and then redoing the accompaniment to follow that with the reharmonization as well. So you can see by using multiple techniques like this, we're developing the theme and the orchestration in lots of different directions. So now at this point, we've got new tempo, reharmonized accompaniment, and modulation. Now the next example is a meter change. What if we do it in 3/4? And here, what I've done is I've split up the French horn so that for the divisi part, instead of both notes being played there, I've got one on the French horn and one on the trombone, so it's a little bit of a different texture as well. Let's listen. So there we are in 3/4 time, and I have the tuba doing long and short notes. Let's just listen to that with the percussion. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then I have a nice little counter line going on here with the violas and the clarinets. and then some sustained notes on the cello, and with these two divisi parts broken up between the French horn and the trombones. There's the little phrase on the violin as well. And then finally with the melody on the flutes and clarinet. We're back in A minor there. Now let's take one final look at this little piano part. And here we are back in 4/4 time with this elongated kind of version of the melody harmonized in A minor. All part of the orchestration toolbox. We'll see you for more in the next video. We're going to have some fun in this video. I want to look at aleatoric music, and that's when there's a random element in the composition. Some part of it is left to chance by the performer. Usually it's indicated in their notation to play some notes only some of the time, or to choose between a few different potential notes. But the idea is that some elements are random, and basically there's an element of chance introduced. Now we're going to have some fun, and I want to extrapolate and apply this notion to orchestration, aleatoric orchestration, and in our modern DAW universes where we have looping, nested looping, step sequencers, and all kinds of tools to introduce random elements to when MIDI notes will occur. So I think the key to making this work is to have some elements stable while some are evolving. So here's our melody and a bass playing pizzicato or bass ensemble, just playing some short and long notes on the root. So that's the foundation. And in this case, I want to use the step sequencer that's built into this DAW because it's got a parameter where it allows different steps to be assigned an element of chance by percentage, kind of like rolling a dice in terms of what the likelihood of it sounding will be. And I know Studio One has a similar kind of function, and many step sequencers do. And we'll look at another way of doing it as well. But in this case, I want to start with that. So here, I'm going to start with the French horns. I'm going to create a step sequencer pattern. And first thing I'm going to do is have it conform to my key. I'm in A minor here. So I'm going to choose from my templates a melodic minor scale. So now I've got all the notes of the A minor scale. And I'm going to set this to be half notes. I want it to be kind of long. And I'm just going to kind of randomly choose some notes, which may or may not be harmonic. B and G. And let's have this one be the B and E, be an open fourth. And then here I'll have C and A. I'll have another one here, maybe this E and this B. And that's fine. So let's just hear what that sounds like to start with. All right, that's all fine. Now let's introduce a couple of random elements. One thing is I'm going to make these all loop in different lengths. I don't want to get too much into the features of this particular step sequencer because these are general principles that most step sequencers have. Maybe this one will have the start at a different position, and that one too. So they're all going to loop in different lengths. And then in addition to that, we can introduce a percentage for how likely it is that these notes are going to actually sound. That one's very little. That one's above 50%, lower. And I'll leave that at 100. So let's listen now. The solo note there. Okay, that's one aspect of it. We're going to introduce more. I'm going to just have this loop differently as well. So we had a little bit more happening. And again, let's play that. And you can see here where each step is in its trajectory. All right, so next, let's go to the cellos. And I'm going to do the same thing, introduce a step sequencer region, and 16 steps, and that's fine. I'm going to just go to my template, and I'll just make it minor this time. And here I'll make this eighth notes. And again, that's a little high. Let me take that one off. We have an octave for that one. I'm not too concerned about how many I have because there's going to be a random aspect to it. G and maybe B for this one. Kind of high. Let's have that like that. And again, we'll start with the looping so that they're going to be looping at different amounts of steps, different numbers of steps. And in eighth notes in this case, or actually let's make it quarter notes. Well, let's see. I'm not sure if we're going to make it quarter notes. And let's start with that, and I'll just loop this over and over as it's playing. And now let's introduce some random elements to randomize the chance or likelihood that any of these steps will actually occur. That one very small, and that one I'll leave at 100. Okay, that's working nicely. And what I'm going to do is copy this now to the violas, but let's change some of it. So let's go to the chance elements. We'll start by changing that. But I also want to change the looping just so that they're not happening at the same rate. And we'll make this one step shorter. And while we're at it, let's make this eighth notes. So let's hear what we've got now. Okay, that's working nicely in the viola section. I think I'm going to just get rid of some of these steps so there's not as many of them. Like that'll be fine. Maybe I'll add one in there just so it's a little bit different. So now what I'm going to do is just loop all these. This isn't even the same length exactly, but that's okay. It's part of the fun. And let's improvise on the oboe to add to the melody. I'll use my expression pedal. So let me play it through once and I'll continue. And there I just captured my performance. Now I'm going to show you a couple of examples of what I did before I started this video, just sort of prepping. I did this a couple of other times, and of course there's different results each time. Here's the first one I came up with. So very random. Here's the second one, and I think this is my favorite, and I'm going to continue with some oboe after the first iteration. Now, if you don't have access to a step sequencer, here are two other ideas to introduce aleatoric or random aspects to the notes that are generated. One, you can use an arpeggiator, and every DAW has an arpeggiator. Set it to slow rates, sets lots of skips and empty spaces, and have it evolve at irregular patterns. Set different ones on the different instruments, slow evolving, and you'll get random interactions between the notes. The other idea is to just program up notes, let's say a 10 or 12 note pattern or bar pattern with a couple of notes in each bar, and do that on different instruments and just loop them at different lengths. Maybe have one loop every 10 bars, the other every 9 bar and 2 beats, and the other one maybe every 8 bars, maybe one of them every 10 bar and 1 beat. So you'll get different interactions between the parts as the piece progresses. So a couple of other ideas for aleatoric or random elements to the orchestration and the way the instruments come together. We'll see you for more in the next video. We're going to have some more fun in this video and explore the concepts of minimalism. Now, instead of being tied to the conventional ways of thinking in terms of harmony, okay, am I going from A minor to E minor, and is the trombone going to move from the third to the seventh, and I'm going to give the fifth to the clarinet section or the third to the flutes? Instead of thinking like that, we're thinking more in terms of cells, repetition, and static harmony. So we're getting out of the mindset of voice leading and part writing. It involves the breaking down of elements to small fragments or cells, repeating them over time with subtle shifts in either timbre or pitch or timing. It uses a lot of ostinatos. There can be drones, arpeggiation, repetitive motifs, lots of empty space. They're all aspects of minimalism, consonant harmony. So we're not really worrying about changing chords and modulation and things like that. It just evolves around one tonal center. There's usually a steady pulse, gradual transformation of parts, and reiteration, repetition of small units that may or may not change over time. So I'm going to, as always, use our familiar theme that we've been working with. And I'm going to start by playing you this little minimalist-based or inspired accompaniment. So I'm starting with a simple drone, basses, bassoons, tubas, and it just repeats throughout. Now I have some arpeggiation coming in here. Just staying around A minor. And these muted regions are the melody played on different instruments. And now I'm going to introduce another element here. The glockenspiel is doubling the top line. And I have second violins. Just playing those chords. Now another motif coming in. So it's evolving. In terms of arrangement, but we're not really going anywhere harmonically. We're just staying in A minor and having different elements come in and out. So let's listen to this same little arrangement, and we'll add in the melody coming in different points in time throughout. Now repetition of the melody. repetition, adding in the trombones. It's building in intensity, but all through repetition of phrases and cells and motifs. New motif. And the melody is getting denser each time with more instruments added in. So that's, as I say, inspired by the concepts of minimalism. Now let's look at another example. And here I've got a steady pulse, but I'm changing the rhythm over time. Let me show you what I mean. Like, for example, here, I'm starting on the downbeat and then on the 8th note here. And it's repeated a few times. Then I'm shifting it by a 16th note, then another 16th note where it starts later. And then as it keeps going, it's going to start even later. So it's the same two notes, but it keeps getting moved later as if it's slowing down the speed of the rhythm over time. And then here as well, I have just these double stops on the second violins, just playing on the downbeats. And in this case, it's an exact repetition. So we can hear the slowing down of the rhythms offset over time against the steady repetition. And here again, we've got the gradual transformation where these are playing right on the downbeats and then they're offbeat by a 16th note, then by another 16th, then by another 16th. So they're getting later and later each time. And then same thing here, I'm doing the steady repetition. So we can hear these rhythms evolving against each other. And I really mean against because they'll conflict at specific points. So let's listen to this. I'm going to mute the oboe melody for the moment and you'll hear what I'm talking about. And on the piano, I have just this little note and then cluster up high to anchor that, and that's steady as well. So they're gradually moving away from each other from that anchored beats 1 and 3. But it's very interesting by having some elements steady and others evolving. And here you can see them starting at different places in the bar. So it sounds like it's just the same thing repeated over and over again, but it's actually not. It's actually evolving. And this is marimba down here. So there's just a few different elements, but the evolution of them over time makes it interesting. And here it is with the melody. It's kind of delicate and gentle with lots of space. And yet not just static repetition. And so on. Now here's a third example. Let's start by listening. So there's my motif, a marimba and alto flute. Second motif, based on an arpeggio. Melody on tuba. That's the cell or fragment or motif that's repeated. So again, evolving over time. Now let's look at the next one, which features some percussion. Piccolo and marimba. Now bass motif. Bass clarinet playing the melody. Now here there are exact repetitions. Let's say I'm going to unloop this and extend it so it's going one beat more and loop that so that it's looping irregularly. And this one, I'll similarly extend this one a couple of beats more like that and loop that. And now we'll get a whole different evolving texture. So here the piccolo and marimba are off with each other now. And the bass is steady. But the piccolo and marimba moving apart add the movement to it. So it can be very liberating and stimulating when you remove part writing and voice leading and harmony and all that from the equation. You can really get some interesting, free, creative sonic explorations. Next video, we're going to go in the opposite direction. In the last couple of videos, we've looked at working with static harmony underneath our melody, and that can be very liberating and open up lots of doors. But as orchestrators, the opposite end of the spectrum is also useful, important, and valuable tool, and that is reharmonizing a melody. So in this video, I want to kind of review some basics about harmonic substitutions. Now, there are three basic functions of a harmonic progression. That's the tonic, the subdominant, and the dominant. So the tonic being the one chord in the key of B flat, that would be B flat, and the subdominant being the four chord, E flat in the key of B flat, and the dominant being the F chord. Now, the tonic implies a sense of stability. This is music theory 101, but just to review it, it's kind of like a landing place. It's the home center of the key signature, and it can be replaced or substituted usually with either the 6 chord or the 3 chord, which are minor chords. They share a lot of the same common chord tones. And the subdominant chords have a kind of feeling of going somewhere. They feel like they want to continue the progression. They lack a kind of stable restfulness that the tonic chord has, but they're not particularly tense. There's not a lot of tension in that chord. And the 4 chord is often substituted for the 2 chord, which is also a minor chord. So in the key of B flat, we would substitute C minor for E flat, for example. Now, the dominant chord is the tension chord where there's an unsettled feeling and you want it to resolve. It has a strong sense or urge to pull you towards the tonic, towards the home key. So that would be F, where we have the A in there resolving up to the B flat. And that can be substituted, thinking diatonically here without going out of the key, with the 7 chord, which is diminished. So in the key of B flat, we could substitute that F with an A diminished, which is kind of like an F7 chord. And that F7 would have the E flat in it going down to the D here, and the A diminished has the E flat. So again, this is kind of harmony 101, but this is basic chord substitutions for when you're orchestrating your melody and you want to kind of continue your orchestration and vary it. So here's a little simple exercise I've done up with violins playing this diatonic melody and bass playing some sustained notes and French horns playing chords. And here's this first version. So you hear that F wanting to resolve to the B flat. And in the French horns, I've got some common tones. You can't see it here, but for example, this is held over since it's common to both chords. And here, this is held over as well. So get to use common tones like that. Now, the next example, I'm going to start substituting. So we can substitute the 6 chord for the 1. So in the key of B flat, that would be G minor. So then it would be G minor, E flat, F, and G minor again, since we're substituting the 1. Now, you have to be careful when you're reharmonizing a chord progression to keep an eye on the melody and make sure it's going to fit the chords. Now, in this case, I had to change it. The F is the note in the melody here, and I've changed it. Let me play it for you with the original F, and it kind of works because that's the 7th degree of G minor, it'd be like a G minor 7. It can work, but it's not really correct and fully diatonic sounding. It's got a very different feeling resting or landing on that 6 minor chord, which it becomes the kind of tonic feeling. So it's not bad with the F. When I say it's incorrect, I'm just going by sort of classic theory 101. Now, if I change that to a G, it'll work. And as an orchestrator, you may be in a position where you can change the melody. You may not, depends on the situation. So very different feeling just changing that 1 chord. Now, the next example, I'm substituting the 3 chord for the 1. So instead of G minor, I'm going D minor. So here at the end, I had a B flat originally, which again, isn't terrible. It can sort of suggest a B flat with the 3rd in the bass. It's a little unsettling since I really am playing a D minor in the French horns. I could voice it as a B flat with D in the bass, but for the purposes of this exercise, I would change the note to an A and it'll fit and resolve a lot better. So they all have very different feelings to them. Now, in this next example, I'm changing the 4 chord. So instead of the E flat, I'm using the 2 chord, the C minor. And here, again, I had to change the melody. And I could have left it with the B flat. That would be the 7th, like C minor 7. It would work and would be fine, but I've changed it up to E flat to get it to fit better. Now, normally, if I was strictly reharmonizing the melody, I wouldn't choose to use that C minor because it doesn't really fit, again, in the classic traditional sense with the melody. But for the purposes of this exercise, let's hear it now with the modified melody. So you hear by changing these single chords, it really changes the whole feeling of the progression. Now here in the next example, I'm substituting the 5 chord with the 7 diminished. So I'm going 1, 4, and then A diminished instead of the F. And again, it'll have a very different feeling. And I didn't need to change any of the melody there. Now, it's beyond the scope of this series to go into advanced harmonic theory, but I want to just give you a taste of another approach. Here I've got our original melody here that we've been working with throughout the series that we know to be in A minor, and I've got a jazz-based kind of substitution going on here. So instead of A minor, I'm using the 6 chord here, which is the F sharp minor 7 flat 5 to B7, doing a 2-5 to the 5 chord, which is E minor, and then to A7 in the bass, and so on. And here I'm voicing with extensions. The sharp 11 is in the melody. So it's a very jazzy kind of reharmonization. And if you want to learn more about this, check out the Jazz Theory Explained series on Groove 3. But just to give you a taste, you'll recognize the melody with this radically different accompaniment. So as orchestrators, we're sometimes called on to do that type of reharmonization as well. So again, more sort of harmonic tools in your toolbox. Now here's another example, same melody, same instrumentation, but a slightly different take on this kind of jazz voicing and harmonization variation. D minor 7 flat 5 instead of the B flat. So they both work, just very different. Now, here's a different approach. Again, not to get too deep into jazz theory, but what I'm doing here is a pedal in the bass, and I'm using fourths in the piano, side slipping. So I'm just kind of going modally, working from an A pedal up to a B flat pedal to a B pedal, and voicing in fourths on piano and doing some side slipping chromatically up and down just to get different tensions and resolutions in a modern modal kind of way. Up to B flat. To B. Back to the A pedal. So again, a different, more modern jazz harmonic type of approach. So those are some ideas to get you started thinking about harmonic substitutions in your orchestration. See you for more in the next video.